bureaucracy. The people that we do not vote for, who tend to make our lives difficult with red tape. So as a constitutional attorney, I have a lot of experience in going against big government. I've also done a lot of lawsuits against Fortune 500 companies. I tend to represent the people. I really like to give the David an opportunity to go against big business or big tech or big government or big pharma. You know, I've taken them all on. That's kind of, I like taking on the big challenges, you could say. So that's, you know, kind of who I am. United States Senate, they're the ones who are responsible for, you know, our federal budget, our federal government. And I, as a constitutionalist, believe that we have gone a little bit too far. We have given a little bit too much power to the unelected bureaucracy. And so I am running for U.S. Senate to rebalance and move us back to a more constitutional framework. I have campaigned in all 58 counties over this last year, and we have, because of those efforts, I've taken a lot of time to talk to people, and believe it or not, government overreach right now, even with inflation and with crime, government overreach is one of the leading things that people are having trouble with. They did not like it when the government came in and said, you can go to work, but you can't. They did not like the fact that the government all of a sudden came in and said, oh, houses of worship can't operate, but casinos can operate. You know, one of my clients was the Pineapple Grill down in Los Angeles, and you couldn't eat on the patio at Pineapple Grill, but 10 feet away, Hollywood actors were allowed to eat outdoors because they had an exemption. And so when bureaucrats have this power to just basically deprive you of your life, your liberties, your ability to make a living, we the people really do not have the freedom that we're supposed to have in the United States of America. And, you know, the United States of America has often been called the city on the hill. I mean, we have been a nation of immigrants. From day one, actually before we were ever a nation, people came to America for the ability to have freedom to live the American dream. And California has been the same. You know, you start off with the gold rush. People were coming here to have a better opportunity. Then we kind of had after the Dust Bowl in the Midwest, all of a sudden farmers were coming out here for that opportunity. Then after World War II, we had the jet and aviation age, and people came here for that opportunity. Silicon Valley took off, and people moved here for that opportunity. I mean, Walt Disney and Hollywood started, and people came here. People have moved to California because it's always been an opportunity, a place where you can let your American dream, your California dream become a reality. Unfortunately, over the last 30, 40 years, we have gone from the best schools in the nation to the worst schools in the nation. We've gone from the best business environment to the worst business environment. Many people are having a hard time realizing that American dream, and one of the main reasons why is this government bureaucracy, this top-down approach, where these unelected bureaucrats in DC have more say over your kids' education than you as a parent have. Where unelected bureaucrats in DC were able to take away people's private property rights during COVID. And what we see, because when unelected bureaucrats who are not accountable to the people, you can't vote them out of office. I win, I don't do my job representing you, you can get rid of me. And so, but unelected bureaucrats, they're hard to fire. They just, they live their life. They do what they want to do. They do not have the same fear of loss of job. And so they will often be more aggressive in taking away your rights, your life's liberty and pursuit of happiness. And we actually saw during COVID, there were many procedures in place for hundreds of years on public health of what you're supposed to do.
And they've basically said, well, we know the Constitution, we've been trained for hundreds of years, we can't isolate somebody unless we know that they have, in fact, are infected. But they basically just, even though there was court cases on it, even though that's what's in their training, they basically threw that away and said, we're going to determine whether or not you isolate based upon the job that you have. And that they basically trashed the Constitution. Well, if we want the United States of America to be that beacon of hope for people who want to have that American dream, we have to rein in the unelected bureaucracy. We have problems with our education, and as I look at the problem, it's this top-down approach. We need to bring it back down to the local people. We have a problem with crime, and it's because we have, one of the main reasons why is we have district attorneys who are refusing to enforce the law. This is the law that our representatives passed. And if you look at our history, Andrew Johnson, the 16th President of the United States of America, Congress passed a law and he said, I don't agree with that law. And he was impeached and he was almost convicted and removed from office as a president because he was refusing to enforce the laws that the people's representatives had passed. And we need to get back to that place where we cannot allow unelected bureaucrats, we cannot allow district attorneys to pick and choose which laws that they're going to enforce. If the people's representatives say these are the laws, then those laws need to be enforced. And if we start enforcing our laws, then we could see major reduction of crime. If we remove the unelected bureaucracy and allow the power to get back down to the parents and the teachers, we're going to have much better education. We remove the unelected bureaucracy, you're going to have a lot more freedom to innovate and build the businesses that you would like to build to make a better America.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So now we will continue to move on to our next topics, which is related to the California propositions as well. So before I do, let me make sure that the screen here has been shared, as for some reason the Zoom does not seem to apply. Does not seem to apply here.
Just as an overview over the rest of the meetup today, we'll be discussing some propositions that our software here at VALUENEX has led us to be interested in for the sake of Silicon Valley. And then further, we explore media and use it to inform some questions that we have for you. And then we'll move on to a fireside chat.
Sure.
So, but before I do, let me make sure that this is working properly. Excuse me. For some reason, give me 1 second, please. So, for some reason, it's not
working, right?
It's being a little finicky.
I think Silicon Valley would be good at our technology.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Let me,
you're making me feel good.
So now we'll continue to focus a little bit more on what we found seems to be trending across not only within Silicon Valley, but throughout the country as well. But for now, we'll focus a little bit more on some of the California propositions that are on the ballots for this upcoming midterm election. And before we do that, I would like to introduce everyone the VALUENEX Radar. So you can think of this as like currently the problems of today are that when people do a Google search, they search up anything, any word, it only shows 10 results at a time. But with our radar, it's able to showcase tens of thousands of results in one map. So that is the product that we are able to provide to the world, essentially. And we hope you can take advantage of this as well. So, and oftentimes this that kind of product can be used across many different industries. From we tend to have like a lot of venture capitalists who would like to use this radar, for example, to invest in particular niches or startups. We also have companies that are very large that are also looking to figure out the next best product in the coming years that they can take advantage of as well. And for politicians as well, they can take advantage of this radar to be able to see what are the most common, what are the most common keywords that political candidates can use to better reach their audience, and especially those that are not so sure whether to vote Democrat or Republican. So to give you an idea, this radar set was sourced through another company called WebHost, which collects all kinds of data throughout the web. And some of our search queries that we wanted to emphasize within this search engine type of algorithm is the ballot, candidate, proposition, amendment, and the economy. So all this is collected via text media, and throughout the months of August to October as well. So we were able to collect 75,000 files, but are able to do a randomized query of 10,000 and showcasing 2,800 clusters. So, like that. Sorry. Okay. So, given that one of these propositions involves that are on the ballot involves reproductive freedom, we basically found that it is one of the most discussed topics throughout the country, frankly, as well. And it is further supported by this map. So what you can see here is a trend line in the form of an arrow showcasing the direction of where the news has been talked about, for example. And what you see on the reds are basically the most discussed topics going on within this data set itself. And what you see in terms of the green area showcases the areas that are continuing to grow. And so I was able to figure out within those key areas what seems to be the most discussed, and abortion happens to be one of them. And in this case, it is related to the Michigan Supreme Court, and is that actually being voted up within the state of Michigan as we speak as well. Would you like to? Okay. We've also we also found Proposition 27 to be interesting, especially given that some of our members here may also be working in possibly either taking advantage of the online gambling industry or is doing something related to that, potentially speaking, in the coming months or years ahead. And so what we found here is there's also a trend in terms of record spending. So significant sums have actually been spent around whether California should legalize online gambling or not. At the current moment, it is not legal. So but all I can say is that there's a significant amount of spending being done to put this ballot forward and possibly get it passed. We've also analyzed Proposition 29, which basically requires all medical physicians to be within the dialysis centers, as at the current moment, the doctors do not need to be within the dialysis centers for patients. And so in terms of what we found in the radar, we found it is it is actually the third time that this proposition has actually been showcased on the ballot. So that is also something to keep in mind as any of you or some of you may continue to vote for the next 2 weeks. And lastly, we'll discuss a little bit about the ballot or the proposition related to tobacco, flavored tobacco. And for those that don't know, it is a proposition of whether flavored tobacco or vape should be legal or not within the state of California. And so what we found here is, as we can see, it's a less discussed topic throughout the state and the country, as a matter of fact. But I just wanted to mention that there is a growing sentiment to essentially ban all forms of these types of tobacco flavors to kids. So proponents say that this could generate extra money, and others say that it is a form of prohibition, which can potentially be costly. So those are the two parties that are saying for and against. And so now we will mention the trends going on within the VALUENEX Radar beyond Silicon Valley as well. And so what we found here is that these, throughout the radar, the entire radar, we found topics such as abortion, crime, the economy, and inflation as being one of the most discussed topics. So for this slide, it mentions abortion and crime because there's an increase in violence related to pro-abortion clinics. And so there's growing sentiment around that as well. That is being one of the discussions of topics that are most common. The economy as well. As a matter of fact, the Dow S&P 500 has published a negative outlook of the U.S. economy for the next year as well. And finally, there's also inflation to keep in mind as well. Despite efforts for salaries to keep up with the rising cost of living, the issues around inflation continues to go unabated and is also one of the most discussed topics throughout the media. And we will also see here are the swing states that an increasing amount of people are watching out for within the sparse and major areas. And the key swing states that whether to determine whether these states will become Republican or Democrat are what is shown here. So the states of Ohio, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are one of the key, purple or swing states to look out for.
Okay, now we'll use a new radar to inform some questions for our prospective candidates. As an introduction, I'm Luke Lamontagne. I'm a data analytics intern here with VALUENEX, and I'm a senior at UC Berkeley. Next slide, please. So for this data set, we use WebHose again, which yields a data set of media, specifically text media, and the query was midterm election and Silicon Valley. So every document should include a mention of both of these topics. So this is a map that we were yielded with, and we see this trend in the data over time, working from top to bottom. Slide, please. So to explore at the start, I used our algorithm-generated areas. You can see a difference in color from major, which is where most of the documents are, growing, which is increasing density, and then sparse, which is unexpectedly low amounts of documents in certain areas. And the keyword that really caught my eye here was Facebook and then China on the left. So Facebook on the right, China on the left. And I kind of wanted to see, first of all, why China was being mentioned. So I actually looked up China and then Russia because it was related to the Facebook scandal. So we can see kind of a large shift, China on the left, Russia on the right, but a little bit of overlap, almost like a Venn diagram in the middle. So I was wondering, what we might learn from the center point here. So further, I looked up some keywords that are related to the Russian and Chinese scandals online, specifically privacy and technology, to explore privacy and security, and sure enough, it's right at the center of Russia and China as keywords on this data set. So looking into specific clusters within this area, right at the center of it, we find one that's discussing cybersecurity. And furthermore, expanding the cluster, we see that there's discussion regarding funding for cybersecurity and policy around cybersecurity and privacy as well. So my first question to candidates, how do you imagine the relationship between policy, industry, and cybersecurity and privacy? And how can voters make an impact?
I would love to take that question because in addition to, because as somebody who, in addition to being a constitutional attorney, I've also done a lot with election law. And I have been somebody who, actually I was going through law school in the year 2000 when we had Bush v. Gore, and I skipped a lot of classes in order to watch the trials and see what was going on. So that was kind of my first taste of the politics and the law side of elections. I'm going to start off by first highlighting, the 2020 election. There's a lot of people who have concerns about integrity of election on the right that came from that election. But what I also want to say is go back 2 years to the election in Georgia where Stacey Abrams was bringing up the issues. Go back 4 years before that, you actually had a Hillary Clinton, which was bringing up issues with elections. And what I want to start off by saying is the issue of election integrity should not be a partisan issue. And one of the reasons we have to understand about elections is that our current set of laws are really based upon a premise that was made in the 1950s, where you would move to a house, you would live there your entire life, you would know who all your neighbors are. I mean, as a kid in that environment, if you did something wrong, your mom knew about it before you got home. The telephone worked pretty well, and every parent knew whose kid belonged, and that was the environment that our election laws were based upon. The problem is we have not updated our laws to keep up with technology. I will give an example of that. The National Voter Registration Act, the last major federal law regarding voter registration, 1993. Okay, was Google around in 1993? Big tech, big government, big data. We have really, since 1993, there has been major advancements in data, yet our laws were written in a time where people didn't move, people knew who their neighbors were, and there was a level of just trust that was kind of built into the system. But now you have people moving all the time. People have problems with, if you follow what's going on in the data or you follow the news, there are people who have concerns about machines counting the vote, and can somebody hack into the machines? That was first brought up in 2004 by a Democrat Maryland professor who raised that issue. So the thing is, every issue that you hear Donald Trump or his people parroting, I can actually take you back 5 years before and show you a Democrat person who said the exact same thing. And too often we allow politics to get into this middle of the discussion that really we all should want a fair and honest election where the people who are legally able to cast a vote, that vote was properly counted, and everybody can have faith in that system. One of the biggest problems, though, of that is your bank is going to have bank-level encryption. But your politician, well, you only vote 2 times every 2 years. We only need the system for 1 day. And so what happens is politicians don't want to buy that fully encrypted system, which is so much more expensive. because they would rather have some of that money be spent on other pet projects. And so we have this problem that every politician who deals with election has. How much money are we going to throw at the integrity of the elections? And you have to remember, anybody who has won under the current system that's there. And it's like, well, if we change the system, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, Green or Libertarian, it doesn't matter what your party is. If you've won, do you really want to change the system that got you elected? Because maybe if you change the system, you're not going to get elected. So that's kind of the problems that we have when it deals with elections, is that the people who have to make those decisions, number one, are hesitant to make those decisions because it can affect their ability to get reelected. And two, it takes money to make sure that you have integrity in the system. And if you put that money there, now that's money that you don't have for other things. So I don't know that I'm necessarily answering the question here, but I'm bringing to light, as someone who has studied elections, been on election law, I'll be honest, in 2016, I was attorney for Donald J. Trump in Wisconsin and Michigan when we were doing those recounts. So I was in different counties in different states, actually there watching the counting of the ballots, and it's quite fun. I would have friends come up to me or people there say, "Did you see the story?" And it's like, I'd read the story. I'm in the room. This never happened. I actually am seeing what's going on, and it's, some person and somewhere just writes random stories and puts it out there, and because the internet moves so quickly, it's not reality. I'll give another example here. I know I'm practicing my filibuster.
No, please go ahead.
But last year during the recall, there was a story that came out about Republicans showing up at the poll on election day and being told that they had already voted. And, the first time I saw the story, it was a couple Republicans. And then somebody else published it, and it now became dozens. And then the next day, the story was hundreds until it became thousands. Now, the thing is, the reporter, knowing that I was an election law attorney, actually called me before the story was published, but after he wrote it. I immediately got a hold of the LA County Register of Voters, my team did, and they reset the computer. There was a bad file. All they had to do was reset the computer. It was one person who got turned away. But within 72 hours, the story out on the internet was thousands of Republicans are being turned away at the poll saying that they'd already voted when they hadn't voted. So there is this natural thing, I don't know how to call it, but with social media, where we actually want to believe that elections are rigged. It's kind of in our system that if our side is losing, we want to kind of believe that our elections are rigged. But if you're somebody like me, an election law attorney, who's actually worked with the election officials, goes in and understands the audits that are there, there are a lot of integrity processes that are in there, and I'd say 99% of all election officials, they want just one thing. They want an honest election, but they're bound by a certain number of rules. And the problem is, because of the partisan nature of our politics, it's really hard to bring the sides together and hash out something that's truly a bipartisan effort. But for this discussion, Jimmy Carter and Jim Baker, about 2 decades ago, sat down and had a bipartisan commission that looked at our elections and all the things that needed to be done in the United States of America to restore integrity. And they brought out all these recommendations, and they promptly got buried because no politician wanted to touch it. So those are kind of, you can have all the commissions, you can have all the business meetings, but as somebody who's running for office, the number one problem is that the people who have to vote to make the changes are the people who got elected by the system that's in place. And that is actually the number one hurdle that we have when it comes to these election issues. So I probably put out a lot more questions than I did in answering the questions, but
No problem. Mark, I learned a lot from you. Thank you. I obviously don't have as much experience as Mark does. But to me, going back to the elections, were the elections, are they safe? In my opinion, they are. You listen to, Trump's chief cyber guy. He said, hey, 2020 elections, they were good. I just think it's dangerous when, politicians kind of say they're not safe when it's not going their way, but it's okay when it is going their way. So, but in regards to privacy and cybersecurity, I think we have to be very careful with all the data that we put out. Whenever you fill out a form or buy anything, I mean, look at Zuckerberg's business, right? It's all based on our own personal data, making billions upon billions, right? Did you guys get a check?
We're losing.
Losing money, there you go. Yeah, so I didn't get a check, right? But he's using all my data. But I think our data, we need to keep it as secure as possible, especially businesses, big businesses. We collected our social security numbers, date of birth, all this information. So I think it's very important that cybersecurity is strong for businesses. And as far as your privacy and what you give out, I would just say be careful whenever you fill out, some sort of raffle form or try to get something, because all that data is collected and somebody's gonna make some money off it sooner or later. But yeah, those are my little 2 cents on that.
Thank you. So now we will continue on with the next topic for the next one.
So in seeing this privacy and security central area, I wanted to also explore some topics that were less founded out of big tech, and explore how big tech was addressing other issues that are on the ballot. So I looked up climate, tax, and then equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I saw that those were pretty centered on this left side here. So to explore clusters within that, next slide please. I found another cluster discussing reproductive rights, abortion, and healthcare. Expanding internally, I found that there was actually an article written about how people have requested, or Google is making policies to protect reproductive rights.
is that a hint? Is that a hint?
I think we had a privacy breach.
But Google is creating policies to protect the healthcare and reproductive rights of their employees. So that made me wonder, next slide, how should companies be involved in the healthcare crisis, and how should current policies change regarding the healthcare crisis?
Do you want to go first this time?
Sure. To me, I think healthcare is very important, and I'm coming from the perspective of the communities that I would like to serve. The Central Valley, even in Los Angeles, Sacramento, there's a lot of issues with diabetes, obesity. So healthcare to me is very important. So employers that can provide health insurance, should try to provide it, because we just need it. It's almost, to me, in my opinion, it's almost like a right, in order to have good health care. You could Google how many kind of families or individuals go bankrupt because they don't have health care and they have to pay out of pocket, and one little sickness turns out to be pneumonia. You end up in the hospital for a whole week, and by the time you're out, you owe thousands upon thousands of dollars because you didn't have that health care. Why? Because you work for a small company or your employer couldn't provide it. So I would say employers that can provide it, great. But even bigger than that, I think it's our kind of responsibility as a state to provide that, if at all possible. Because like I said, it is a right. Diabetes. You shouldn't have to forego your diabetes medicine or, the strips you need because they cost $100, $1 each. And so therefore you forego buying those, and before you know it, you have a, diabetic seizure and you die because you don't know how high your sugar level is. Again, these are choices that regular common people throughout California have to make every day. So in my opinion, it's very important that we provide health care.
Get ready for another filibuster answer here, guys. I got to really start working on my filibuster skills. So, but I want to start off with a story, and the story began in 1838. There was a couple congressmen on the floor of the House of Representatives, and they were in debate, and somebody said something that somebody else took umbrage with. And the one who took umbrage basically challenged the person who made a statement on the floor of Representatives to a duel. And they each named their seconds, and they went out to the dueling grounds, and it was rifles at 85 yards. And they showed up, and then the seconds, it was their job, okay, both parties showed up, your honor's intact, now go back home. But the guy who took umbrage of the statement made said, no, I want to actually, fire. So they went out there 85 paces and they shot, and they both missed. And so the second said, hey, okay, you've shot, you've proved your honor, everything's good, go home. No, I'm not satisfied. So they shot a second round, and they both missed. And he still refused. He said, no, I'm not going to give up. We're going to shoot a third round. And on the third round, the guy who took umbrage actually hit the congressman who made the statement, and the guy bled to death very quickly before proper medical care was there. Now, why I'm telling this story is what happened in Congress next. Congress was upset. Every newspaper in the United States was talking about the duel. Actually, every pastor in the pulpit that Sunday was talking about the evils of dueling and how this ancient practice of, preserving your honor by standing on a field and shooting at each other should not be allowed. But what's interesting about this is Congress stepped up there, and they knew that they did not have the authority to pass a national law on dueling. Why is that? Because our United States Constitution set up dual tracks of government. A federal government with limited authority and a state government that is in charge, that had police powers and took care of the health and welfare of the people. And this is a very important principle because the founding fathers did not want Washington, D.C. to have all this power. They wanted there to be balance with the states being able to fight back. And so at that time in 1838, people would choose where to go to have their duels. We all have heard about the Aaron Burr and Hamilton Burr. They both crossed over from New York to New Jersey because they knew that in New Jersey, even though dueling was illegal, they never prosecuted it. But where they lived in New York, you would die. So they made a conscious decision to go across to New Jersey to fight. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, was known for dueling, but he always left Tennessee and went across the border to Kentucky to do his duels because Kentucky did not have any laws about it, and so he would fight his duels in Kentucky and then go back home to Tennessee. Where I'm going is here, Congress knew that they didn't have the power to pass a law. So what ended up happening is they introduced a constitutional amendment and said, give us the power, states. Because they had a constitutional amendment, goes to the states have to ratify it. They said, states, give us the power to pass a national law. After much debate, they decided, no, we don't have enough, we're not going to get this through, so they dropped it. But what they did do is they passed a law that says you can't duel in D.C. because the Constitution did give them power to do that, to pass laws in D.C. How this is involved in healthcare is, we'll start with the decision of Dobbs versus Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court went back to the original intent of the Constitution and said, wait a second, abortion is a healthcare which is a state's issue. It's up to the states to preserve the health and welfare of the citizens. And so what the Supreme Court did in the Dobbs decision is they said, this was never supposed to be a federal issue. The federal government should not have the power to make these decisions. And so what the Supreme Court did is they said, we are sending this back to the state. Because in the states, your state government is much more responsive to the people than the federal government is ever going to be. And so they sent it back to the states and said, states, you deal with this issue. So one of the things that, you know, a long way around to bring it back, because as a constitutionalist, I want to get us back to the first principles of the Constitution, because it's that Constitution with the separate jurisdictions of government, balances of power, that made us the great nation that we are, and we need to get back to that so that we as individuals have liberty and freedom to pursue our American dream, to pursue our California dream. And so, to answer the question, the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that this is not a federal issue. We got to bring it back to the states and allow the states to experiment with what's best. One of the things that I am very interested in is Singapore and how they do their public health. There's a lot of business, competitive, government interaction that I think if we, as the federal government, gave the power to the states to start playing with, there's some stuff from Singapore that I think could be very powerful here in the state of California, state of Texas, you know, where they could play with some private public relationships, competitive aspects of it. But as long as it becomes the federal government, you're going to see just a couple companies dominating. You're going to see massive amounts of money being spent. In 2004, I worked for a state legislature, and I was working on workers' comp reform. And I remember the senator that I worked for at the time, he was the one who was pushing, he had been pushing workers' comp reform for about 10 years. And so as his employee, I was actually the one doing all the meetings and putting stuff together, and I threw some sample language in. And within about a half hour of this sample language being thrown in one of the draft bills, all the insurance lobbyists came rushing over to the Capitol, and they were phone calls to the governor, and, you know, it's like, and I sat him down, I said, what's wrong with that language? It fixes this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. The defense attorneys are going to like it, the plaintiff's attorneys are going to like it. It's like, and they said, you're right, but we have not priced it out for insurance purposes, so we don't know what it's going to cost us. And so we would rather kill the entire bill, even though we know it solves all the problems, because we don't have the ability to price this out, and so we don't know what it means to our bottom line. And it was a lesson that I learned that day that I will never forget, is that the uncertain, when big business is involved, the uncertainty of what it's going to mean to their bottom line, they will kill stuff no matter how much good that it does. And so when you have big government over the healthcare of the nation, there's going to be a few lobbyists, a few companies that are going to have this ultimate power, and it's no longer about the individual liberties and what's best for the people. So again, another long filibuster, but where I'm coming from is we need to get this debate out of the federal government, bring it back to the states where they can experiment, work with companies, do some private government relationships type stuff, but be more responsive, because your local government is going to be much more responsive than the federal government.
Okay, let's bring it back. Next slide.
So we will continue on.
So what we're seeing here is a little bit of a split in the radar between privacy and security, which are issues that big tech has brought up into policy, mostly through scandals, and then climate change, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which are policy issues that are being pushed within big tech today. So my next question for the candidates is, how can policy create an environment in which Silicon Valley can do social good?
Ooh, want to take that one?
Thank you. Okay, how am I going to filibuster this one?
How can policy create an environment in which Silicon Valley can interesting.
How many people here know who Dan Price is? He is the executive up in Seattle, Washington, who took his salary, removed his multi-million-dollar salary and gave all of his employees a minimum salary of $70,000. Happened about 4 or 5 years ago. He's a credit card processing. Okay.
Sounds familiar, yeah.
Dan Price used his position as a CEO of a company. And, no government told him how to do this. He just said, you know what? I've looked at the data and I see that CEOs and the, C-suite executives, that they are used to be paid about 20 times the normal employee, but now they're being paid thousands of times more than the average employee in the company. And he said, this is not fair. And rather than wait on Washington, D.C. to say, this is what you have to do, he said, you know what? I'm going to be that lone voice. I'm going to just do it. No matter what it costs me, yeah, I'm going to take my salary from like 1.5 million down to $70,000. And we're going to take that money that I was going to make, and I'm going to make sure my employees have the ability to make a decent living. So the answer I'm going to say is this, there's never a government solution to make somebody do what's good. The golden rule, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. That is something that every executive, every mother, every father, it's something that each and every one of us really needs to do. And I think it's up to, if you are an employer, you need to stop and go, what can I do to make the lives of my employees? I mean, these are the people who are making me the money that I'm making. What can I do to make their life easier? We see ping pong tables in businesses because they understood that it helped their employees. That needs to be a mindset. We can't treat employees as if they are just slaves, human chattel, something that a renewable resource. If we treat our employees as renewable resources, then something that you could just swap out with another employee, we're going to have problems. So to say, what can we do? I don't think that this is a government solution. I think as Dan Price did, and he just stepped up and said, you know what? I'm going to do something different. In the same way, Steve Jobs, he stepped up and said, you know what? I'm going to do something a little bit different. We're going to build, offices this way. We're going to reinvigorate. I think what we have to do is we have to make it so people are willing to innovate. So people are willing to experiment. And we got to understand that when somebody fails, we don't make them a villain because they tried something that didn't work. But I think as a society as a whole, we got to get to the place where we're saying, you know what, I have to live with my fellow man. What can I do to make their life better? And if we as a society, as Silicon Valley, start looking at how we can make the lives of our employees better, how we can make the lives of our communities better, rather than dictating but leading by example, I think we'd have a lot better community.
May I reply to that?
Sure.
So I used to come from that perspective.
Yeah.
Somewhat libertarian, classic liberal in Europe. Came here, and I kind of see what you're saying has been tried here in Silicon Valley and kind of failed. Because most people don't have ping pong tables in their office.
Yeah. I just made a comment because there's one right here.
So what I'm saying is, there's also an element of people do what they get away with.
Yeah.
In society where everyone's a good person, you don't need regulation. And
Yeah.
I feel like that was the case maybe 50 years ago. Like you could have a more free society because people were good. Like they were, and I feel like I came here and I was very much anti-housing regulation.
Okay.
I saw landlords and I'm like, you know what? Because of people like you, we kind of have to regulate this market.
Yeah.
Then I saw like companies, and then I was like, because of companies like you, we need consumer law. And then case after case, I kind of like became reset. Then I see how people are treated in Europe, and people are happier, which leads them to drive better in traffic, be kinder to each other, because they just. And sometimes I go into the store here and I get horrible service, and I'm like, you know what? That person should probably not make that much money because they're useless. But then I think about they probably also have an asshole boss. Why should they work hard? So this is difficult. Like ideologically, I wake up on that side of the bed or the right side of the bed, and I'm confused. But what I think is, I think you're wrong because I think that in essence, People will do what they get away with. Dan Price, if every CEO was like him, a great world, but they're not. And
No.
I think that you kind of have to adjust regulation after that, the worst comes. The worst person is the person where you kind of have to set regulation. You shouldn't go too far. You don't have to go all France, but you can, you know, there is an element of like you can't rely on people being good people because they're not.
Right, but I see where Mark's coming from, though. I don't think you can, you know, make a policy and have Silicon Valley, you know, follow that policy. I think, to your point, business is going to dictate whether or not that business is going to be successful, right? If to your point, if somebody's an a-hole, you're not going to buy there. You're not going to shop there eventually. It's going to come to that point where, hey, I'm not buying there or subscribing to that business. But when it comes to housing, for example, if San Francisco didn't have rent control, I mean, there'd be a lot more homeless in San Francisco, right? Because
Actually, no.
you know, you think so? Okay. Well, I'm just thinking about.
Limits housing supply and mobility.
Okay.
It's actually like horrible.
Horrible meaning.
It's a horrible policy.
Right, but hey, at least some people can live in San Francisco because of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to live there and be able to work at that donut shop that's there, you know, supplying food or drinks or whatever. Is my point, right? You wouldn't be able to live and work in that area if it wasn't for affordable housing or rent control in San
Actually,
Francisco.
no, that's wrong.
Okay.
Because basically what happens is,
I do want this discussion to continue.
Yeah, yes.
And we will get to the
we'll
fireside
get to
chat.
the town hall fireside chat very soon.
Yeah, but I don't think you can make Silicon Valley force them, because it's not going to be about, you know, entrepreneurship and whether you have a product that somebody wants to buy and use. And, you know, even now, for example, working from home, right? Whoever thought that the majority of people would want to work from home and make it work? And now there's companies that are forcing people to come back to work. Well, hey, they're slowly quitting, right? They're finding other companies that are given that opportunity to continue to work from home. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years, where you have all these vacant, you know, buildings. What are you going to do with them? You know, if people continue to work from home. So in my opinion, it's going to be tough. You really can't have a policy and force Silicon Valley to act a certain way, in my opinion. The market, free market will dictate.
If we start debate, I'm a lawyer.
I know, right?
I would really become.
I'll hire Mark.
We will continue. Oh, so I believe, is that the last one? I believe
This is
so.
the last question for now until we get to the fireside.
So that is the last question.
Let's run through the next radars and then we'll get to the fireside. There's 2 more slides, I believe, right?
So from everything that we found, this is from a politically neutral standpoint. Analyzing from the radar itself, there is a possibility that there will be a Republican majority across the legislature.
And you're talking Congress, DC?
But Congress, and I cannot say Congress within a national level.
Oh, you meant the state? Okay.
Not necessarily.
So this radar is pulling national news. So
Okay.
essentially what we're seeing is that
Congress.
the Republican Party is being talked about more in media. And so
Okay.
we're thinking that this might suggest that because there's more discussion in media about the Republican Party, there'll be more votes towards the Republican Party.
Okay.
And yes, so we're not here to support nor be against any particular candidate. We're just here to report what we see on the data, based on the data. So that is what we found, and something to also note and watch out for in the coming months ahead are areas related to artificial intelligence and China. As one can see within the data set and clusters, maybe within the greener areas, there is increasing discussion around China actually increasing its spending and its activities within the AI space. So those are some of the top key areas to watch out for in the coming months and years ahead.
Okay, so now on to the fireside chat. I personally like to see Socratic style where everyone can participate. Of course, let's orient it back towards you guys so that we can hopefully learn more about policy to come. As you speak, if you haven't spoken before, please introduce yourself briefly.
And let's all make sure to be respectful to one another. And that
I wanted to be.
So we are here. We are in Silicon Valley, where this is a place for learning from many different perspectives, and we are trying to be as inclusive as possible is our goal, and to really understand truly what other perspectives are, even if they may sound extreme, I would say.
I think it would be a good idea to start off sort of where we left off with the housing crisis. It is a national issue, but also something that's very much a California issue. So I'm not sure who was, I think you were last
So,
talking. Introduce yourself.
My name is Fernando Lorenzo. I'm the director of the Global Capital Social Impact Lab at Stanford. But in my previous life, I was also a housing policy researcher. I had a PhD in real estate economics, and I analyzed rent control for the Swedish government. So the problem with rent control, here in Silicon Valley, you have all these educated people, but they have fundamental mistrust in markets. And markets are actually pretty good at what they're doing. So, for example, I saw this development and all the local politicians, like, we're doing this development, we're building a couple low-income housing units. We're so great. I'm like, you're making the situation worse, like, for real. Like, you're building maybe 1,000 more office units. So we're gonna have like 1,000 more people living here. And then you're gonna have like 15 low-income housing units. That's not like a net positive.
It's not enough.
Having to explain that to people with graduate degrees from great schools is kind of fascinating. But the issue with rent control is that it limits supply because it's just not nice. Landlords don't want to build something if it's very cheap. But again, we need to protect people. Of course, I get the argument. You want to protect low-income people. I totally get that argument. The problem is it's a very blunt force. Like it's like they do in South Africa. They subsidize milk. They subsidize butter. Problem is, I mean, the price of butter is really not going to impact me, but it's going to impact someone else. But I'm paying the cheap price of butter. Same thing with housing. I live in a rent-controlled apartment in San Francisco. I mean, it's great. I mean, I appreciate that, but it's really not me that this should be targeted at. So what you're seeing is you're just limiting supply, and most people that get these attractive apartments are insiders, people that knew the right people, or were able to, know a landlord, or could afford to pay way more. So it's not really effective at targeting those who need help. That's number one. Number two is when you regulate housing markets as much as you do here, owning real estate becomes risk-free because there's so little risk. So it goes up in price, which benefits those who already own, and this doesn't benefit those who are poor. So actually, the policies that were supposed to help the poor are actually benefiting the rich, and you're making it risk-free. But if you take more of a laissez-faire kind of housing policy, like you see in some states, okay, owning property is actually very risky. Booms and busts. What happens is when there's a boom, there's a ton of construction, so middle-class people can buy a home for $500,000. Then there's a bust, a couple of banks go bankrupt, or the developer loses money, which is not the end of the world. But here, it's risk-free. So banks and developers are not going to hurt, but the middle-class person paying $3,000 for a one-bedroom is going to hurt. So all these well-intentioned policies are actually not that good. That's my take on rent control.
And I'm not going to argue with you there because I agree, but it is a state issue, not a federal issue, so I'm going to stay out of it for that reason.
So what would be I mean, I hate to put you on the spot, but what's the solution there? Then just let the market
You
pretty
need
much.
to build more. Like so downtown,
Right.
like all the downtowns along the peninsula, like with the building codes, it's not Paris. Like you can build more. That's not like supply. That's like a big thing, just supply. Then you can still protect low-income people, but you could make it more targeted. Like, this is difficult. Like, we actually, in Sweden, it was suggested, it didn't happen, of course, but to maybe have people pay market rents, but then you can have targeted subsidies to people that actually couldn't afford them. So you could actually have, and you can make them not like the coupons or vouchers you have in some parts of the US, because I know about the history of discrimination, so you have people that pay with that, but you can try to find a way. It's not easy, but I think in general, just incentivized construction is going to be really important. And I talk to people, and they just tell me how difficult it is to build here. And I think, you know, it's supply issue. Like,
So don't control the rent, but subsidize it, is what
For
you're
those
saying.
who need
For
it.
those who need it.
yes, because also one thing to keep in mind, think about demand and supply. Like, supply is fixed in the short term, like you can't build more. So it's really
Right.
important that the existing housing stock is used effectively. And what does that mean? That, you know, singles live in studios and families live in houses. But with Prop 13, you kind of destroy that. So and then you have, you know, with rent control. Once you have an apartment, you locked into it. It's like gold mine. If you're paying like $1,500 a month, like you're not going to move forever. But you might want to live in a different neighborhood. You might be living in the north side of town and you work on the south. It would be great to move because it causes congestion if people actually live near the. Also, it might be too big for you. Like maybe you want something smaller. But you're not going to move because you're stuck. So the right person is no longer in the right place, but the market really makes sure that the right person is in the right spot because people are going to prioritize when they pay with their own money. So you can actually like free up a lot of housing stock. I think Prop 13 is like a major issue here as well.
Yeah, and I don't think changing is even an option. But thanks. Yeah.
This is something I think, and I managed to disagree with both of you. So we're all equal in some regards.
There you go.
I gotta tell you, I cannot 100% agree with myself all the time.
Awesome.
Sorry, by the way, my name is Victor. I'm a PhD student at Stanford. I mean, I think you're proposing one solution, but you're attacking another thing that I think is a good thing. I think rent control is probably allowing people to live somewhere where they wouldn't be able to afford to live otherwise. At the same time, you can incentivize building more housing because, I don't know, for example, you can have a higher new rents and people still want to move into the area where you're building new housing. Like the housing supply here is much lower than what's demanded. So I don't see how removing rent control will address anything. In fact, what you should do is you should build more housing and get rid of the regulations as you.
There are many studies on this, and I mean, say in general, rent control will limit supply because people are just not keen on building.
But the problem here is the fact that people aren't building housing. Wouldn't that be the solution? Is to.
So how are you going to get people to build? Like they're for-profit businesses.
Yes.
So if the rents are controlled, they're not going to be as keen on building it. But let's say in your world, you say, like, for example, that, okay, what's newly built is not rent controlled.
Sure. Let's go.
Then that's going to solve some of the supply, but then you have other issues in California with permits and so forth and the TV's processes. But yes, okay, let's see that. That would address some of the supply issues, yes, of course. And that would make the difference between rent control rents and market rents lower, so that will also make it. But the problem is rent control locks people in. Like you sit, if this contract starts to have value, what if you could actually have a market where there's so much supply that, you know, like a middle class person can afford it without any government intervention?
Well, once it comes to that, maybe then we'll think about that issue then. But at the moment, I don't think.
There are many places where that can happen. I'm not saying you can't change things overnight because, like, you can't actually, like, housing, a home is a very personal thing. Like, you can't just change these policies overnight. Like, in any regime change, you have to protect those who live. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, maybe you pay more rent, but you're going to get support to compensate for that.
To me, that just sounds like a direct government transfer to a private company.
Okay,
Well,
so
I'm gonna just throw, even though it's not a federal issue, not something that I'm running for, I'm gonna just throw out something for you to think about here. Under rent control, it's gonna be really hard for a landlord who, let's say, owns a 3-story building in San Francisco. He has 3 different tenants, one on each floor. it's under rent control, it's gonna be really hard for him to just tear down that building and now build a 8-story building that is gonna provide 8 places for people to live. Until you get rid of that rent control aspect of it, where the landlord, where the tenant has basically the rights over the property, you really do not allow landlord to go, you know what, I own these three houses, I'm gonna just tear down all 3 houses and I'm gonna build something nicer, which will better take care of the needs of the community. So that the rent control does create a lot of red tape that prohibits landlords from finding better uses of the property to maybe more take care of the needs of the community.
Maybe, I mean,
Yeah. I think that's the market side that you're talking about.
In general, but also like in general, like it's just difficult with permits to build in this area. Like I think even if you had a vacant building, you probably wouldn't get a permit for an 8-story building. But in general, like I want to say, I'm not in favor of throwing people out. Like I think the problem is a lot of people that could afford another rent are benefiting. It's just not it's very blunt. You want to help those who really need help. And it's just a very blunt instrument of helping those people. Okay. So thank you for that.
I have a question for Jose.
Yes, of course.
Sure.
So my name is Philippe Noel. I'm in financial services and insurance.
Hey, Philippe.
And as somebody who's in an industry that could be pretty dry, as like you are in insurance, so we understand that.
Yes.
Board of equalization is something that most people, like you said, they don't even know what it is.
Right.
I mean, a
Right.
lot of people don't know what a county supervisor is. They don't know what that supervisor is, or what an assembly is. But
Right.
Board of equalization really is one of those where you have to really pay attention, and even someone like myself, what does BOE do?
Right.
But my question is, what does the board have to do with Prop 13? And as somebody who's seeking election to the board, not necessarily your position on it, but do you think that Prop 13 has a chance of going away as we know it in California in the near future at some point?
Could you also reiterate what Prop 13 is for those who are not?
Sure. So Prop 13
Sorry, it's a
basic.
long question, but
Yeah,
I'm
no, it's
very
okay.
curious.
Yeah, so Prop 13, I think we mentioned it back here too. It pretty much keeps your taxes pretty much stable at your purchase price. So folks that bought their house 20 years ago for $200,000 are paying at that tax base, even though it's now worth 1.5 million. Let's say, for example, right? And that caused a lot of issues. They cut funding in some schools and a lot of local governments. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think it is. I mean, for that you have to pretty much change the Constitution, to change that. And I don't think it's going to happen. Excuse me? It would take definitely a lot, right? But there's things that California has done, like Prop 98, to guarantee funding for schools to kind of bridge that gap. Even though schools are not getting that much money from Prop $13, then Prop 98 kind of puts a minimum where schools are going to get. Hopefully, if there's a budget surplus like we have now, there's more money going to schools. But yeah, so it's going to take a lot of effort to change it. And to your point, BOE is one of those positions that nobody does hear about. I followed it, and I've never met my rep, my BOE rep in District 1, and it turns out he's a 30-year career politician. Been there for 30 years, ran for governor last year during the recall, but never really seen him in any sort of events. And I could understand it's a huge district, as you saw, right, from the Oregon border all the way down to Bakersfield and San Bernardino. So one of my goals, if elected, is to let folks know what is the BOE, what does it do, and it handles that tax appeals. But what I saw a lot was a lot of private companies saying, hey, my $1 million bill is, my building for $10 million is not really valued at $10 million. It should only be valued at $700,000, so I pay less taxes, right? So I see a lot of private sort of companies appeal, and you can look in the BOE sort of archives and see what kind of companies are appealing their tax bills. And that's what I normally saw. I didn't see too many property owners, appealing their taxes. At one point, price was going up, and there was some, even now, there's some folks that don't feel like their property taxes are valued. So that's one area that I want to do, is educate folks. The other thing is a lot more boring, insurance taxes. Insurers pay a tax on their premiums. If somebody tries to do something funky and not pay, the tax on the right premium, then they might get a bill. But as I mentioned, that's going to be one of my goals, is try to educate the whole district as to what the BOE does. No, it could be any insurer. It could be workers' comp, auto liability. It's any insurer that does business in California pays a tax on their premium. Yeah, so it's a variety. But yeah, so that's my goal. Educate folks more on BOE, and hopefully I get to do that past November. Yes, sir.
Just a question. So I grew up in New Jersey, so I actually don't know that much about the elected executive positions in California. So I'm just curious, what are your kind of powers as what is the board of, what does this board do?
Yeah, so there's 4 board members, and the California is broken up into 4 districts. District 1, which is the one I'm running for, as I mentioned, runs for the Oregon border, all the way down to the Central Valley to Kern County and San Bernardino. And then District 2, which is your kind of district, runs pretty much with the Oregon border coast, all the way down, I think, down to the end, to near Santa Barbara. And then you have District 3, which is LA. That's its own district. And then you have District 4, which is the San Diego area. Now, each district has about 10 million residents. And so that's why it took, District 1, because it's very rural, to have a big area just to get those 10 million. LA is a district in itself. That has 10 million folks. And so the Board of Equalization, like I mentioned earlier, handles appeals on taxes, property taxes. So if you own a property in California and you feel your taxes are too high, you appeal to your local assessor. And if that doesn't go well, then you could appeal at the state level. And that's where the Board of Equalization comes into play. So the board meets once a month for about 1 or 2 days, and that's all they do is listen to appeals. But they also handle the tax on private insurance companies, all the major ones you see here that handle your auto, life, disability, workers' comp, and also alcohol and tobacco. Like if you have a business and you buy a lot of tobacco and alcohol, you pay taxes on that. So they regulate those taxes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, do people appeal in court as well? Is there any?
That is like the administrative court, but you don't go to your list, your district court to appeal your taxes. That's where you go to this appeal board. Yeah.
I was wondering as well, one that seems very hands-on, 10 million people handling all the appeals. That must be a ton of work.
You'd be surprised, really, I think within 2 days they handle all the appeals. Not too many people appeal their taxes, apparently. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and this is your state taxes,
This is
not
your
your
state
federal.
taxes, right, not your federal taxes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's one of my goals, is to educate folks on what the BOE does, definitely.
What would you say is the appeal success rate for when people appeal?
You know what, the ones I saw, there's a lot of work that goes behind that. The actual Board of Equalization is an agency of the state, and they do all the research behind it, and then they pretty much give the recommendation to the board, and the board members can either go with it or not. But the ones I saw, most of the appeals were denied. Yeah.
Most of them are.
Yeah, the ones that I saw, yeah. I honestly, I only saw 2 or 3 meetings, so I can't say that I saw all of them throughout the history. But when I saw those meetings, I didn't see any that say, yes, we're gonna change your tax rate.
May I ask another question? Given the nature of this, where is the room for politics? Because I think this is fascinating. You must be just interpreting tax law. Basically, someone is appealing, and then you interpret the tax code, and you're this person is right or wrong. But that doesn't strike me as a very ideological issue. If you think the tax code is wrong, that's a different
Change
issue.
it, yeah.
Is there any room for politics or policy?
There used to be a lot more, but the legislature about 6 years ago really took away a lot of the Board of Equalization's power. So the Board of Equalization was created in the 1879 Constitution of California as kind of a taxpayers advocate group. And that was established there, and I think it was about 6 years ago, the California legislature said there's some battle going on between tax policies, and the legislature said, we're going to just rein you in. And so now the Board of Equalization really has just become more of an adjudicatory process, and it used to have a lot more say over the tax policy of the nation, or of the state.
Exactly. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask the candidates? No?
Means we answered all the questions.
Okay, one more, I guess.
Why isn't there like a fire? Like the
The
back?
fire, we have the water.
You do like a crackling sound.
Well, like, we initially thought of Fireside just because it's very common in Silicon Valley that a fireside chat usually means two people sitting together, whether they, maybe with different views, and like just having a talk. So it's different than your typical political debate, which everyone is standing against each other. So there's also a psychological aspect to this as well. When you sit and have like your water right next to you, you're able to communicate a little bit better and like hopefully like diversify your own point of view, or be more willing to be more tolerant of others that way too. And this is in line with Silicon Valley culture. So this is why we consider it fireside chat at the moment.
Next time we'll have an actual.
A little fire in the background.
I'm just playing games, but actually they're really after being on the campaign trail, it's actually very refreshing.
Okay,
With
yeah.
different types of candidates meeting each other.
If anything, our mind is the fire.
Oh.
Think of it that way. Okay, well, I guess if that that is about it, if that is everyone's questions, we will, I guess, adjourn for now. And for our next meeting, it will be on the 17th of November, and it will be related to the Asia Pacific region, potentially. So stay tuned for that as well. And stay tuned. And in the meantime, we will now have our networking event portion of our day, and that will last until 8.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Nice job, Mark.
Should we all take like maybe a group picture?
Sure.
360. I did. Okay, yeah, let's leave it at that. So.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Unfortunately, I have another event in San Francisco, so I'm going to have to run here pretty quick, so.
Sounds good.
We have some snacks and drinks for everyone.
Yes, we have
Nice.
drinks.
Oh, good.
So let's.
Thank you. I hope I didn't filibuster you too long.
You have the forms?
I have a little bit more history
Just
behind
passing out
it.
some forms.
I
The flyers?
story.
What's
Did you
your
figure
purse?
that out?
Oh, Jose, I'd like you to meet Jargon. He's from Colombia.
Oh, Jürgen. ¿Hablas español?
He cannot speak that much English.
Okay. Okay, good. Gracias. A ver cómo nos va. ¿Trabajas aquí?
Yo fundé una aplicación móvil en Colombia.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that.
Put this away.
Estoy acá aprendiendo conectarme y aprender la cultura de Silicon Valley. Estoy avanzando, ya estoy en una etapa como una aceleradora. Estados Unidos para crecer y transformar y generar ese impacto que la compañía requiere en Latinoamérica.
Qué bien. Pues felicidades. ¿Y cómo te gusta? ¿Cómo te gusta Silicon Valley ahorita? ¿Sí?
Poder estar más.
Blueberry. That's an unusual snack.
¿Y cuándo vas a regresar?
I think it's good for you, but
¿En del año o en 2 años? ¿O ya te vas a quedar aquí?
I'm gonna pass here. It's just one stop after another after another. So. Yeah, I gotta go to the next place and speak again. So.
Pues déjame ver mi tarjeta.
Today, so.
A ver.
So I'm working with a lot of people outside of the U.S.
I like taking the history and merging it in with modern day.
Igualmente, Martín.
Not
Déjame
everyone,
darte
but it's I
el
do
libro brochure, a ver si
take
conoces a
complex
alguien.
program of complex issues of law, help them understand it with a non-aggressive story.
So, ¿trabajas aquí en Silicon Valley? Oh, sí, okay. Okay, está cerquita.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
¿Eres qué? ¿O consultor? ¿De qué?
Me pregunta eso.
Oh, sí.
I appreciate that. Thank
Oh,
you.
sí. Oh, mira. Oh, qué bien.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh, qué bien. ¿Dónde aprendiste español? ¿De dónde? ¿Dónde? Oh, desde
I have a better
Perú.
idea.
Ok. Qué
Get rid of the
suave.
whole IRS code.
Pues felicidades.
Go to the
¿Y cómo te
national
gusta
sales
aquí?
tax.
So,
So that
¿has
way,
ido a
when you
Tokio
buy
muchas
something,
veces?
you go buy a mega
Sí,
yacht,
he ido
you're going to pay tax on that. If you go buy a Rolls Royce, you're going to pay tax on that. So rather than
Oh, mira qué
Así
bien.
que sí, tuve esa oportunidad este año y también me he mudado a California.
where those who are well connected go
Qué
get
suave.
special.
Pues felicidades. Si te puedo ayudar en lo que sea, ahí me mandas un...
Para mí es un placer.
Now you're forcing people to try to do very complex, tax laws, and make it simple, like, you make so much money,
Así que
you pay so much money,
llegar a
you
tener
pay tax when you get the money.
ustedes tienen que
And so if you get $100,000, your tax is going to be fairly set, you know,
Okay,
with,
qué
you
bien.
know, hey, but if I decide I'm going to
Qué
take
suave, qué suave.
now I'm
Mucho gusto, Martín.
$9,500.
Felipe, ¿dice Felipe o Felipe? Felipe, mucho gusto. ¿De dónde eres? De Costa Mesa. Oh, I love Orange County. Beautiful. So how long have you been in San Pedro? That's good. Okay. You told me you guys are running everywhere, huh?
Want my wealth.
You got a week and a half, right? Good. That's good. She's got to be happy. Oh yeah. I brought my boss with me. So, you know. That's it. Latino, right? That's good. That's good. That's good. Well, good luck. I know it's not going to be easy. It can sound like, but good luck. Buena suerte. You know, it's. We came out of nowhere. You know, we in the primary. We beat somebody that was already endorsed by CAD for 10 months, and we just came out of nowhere and said, hey, let's just spread the word, see what happens, and it worked. Yes, we're against the Take Dates. He's been around for like 30 years. Yeah, and so this, and he tried to do the recall last year. He ran for governor, he wasn't successful. So I'm thinking he's really just going to do this for a couple of years if he wins, and then try it again. But we'll see. Same here. Thanks for your questions. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, what is that? What do they do? Yeah. Exactly. I agree. Awesome. Well, good luck, man.
So it's very different demographics, different walks of life, with regard to the field, that people want to
latinos aquí en el área amazónica. ¿Qué es lo que le aqueja a usted? ¿Qué es lo que lo lleva a crear estas nuevas reglas que se quieren implementar? ¿Y cuáles serían estas reglas?
¿Sabes qué? Lo más importante para mí es la educación. Todos dicen que educación es como, en inglés se dice equalizer, que todo se pone igual, pero la verdad es que una escuela en Fresno, en la área pobre, no es igual como una escuela aquí en Palo Alto. Aquí tienes computadoras. Right, good luck. All right, good meeting you. Oh, yes.
Can I get a picture with you two?
It's very educational.
Thank you.
Here's the mic.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Take care, Mark.